Okay, now, hello, welcome back to episode 68 of Dark Academia for Insomniacs. My name is Breezy, and today we're going to be talking about Romanticism. But before I dive into that, hit that like button, ring that bell for notifications. Also, please subscribe. We have hit that point in the call where it feels like I'm constantly blowing my nose. Even though I don't have it anymore, it's like that phlegm and everything. I'm like, ugh. That was a bit graphic for you to detail, but if you know, you know. But with that being said, why don't we talk about romanticism and what actually is it? Well, romanticism is an attitude or intellectual orientation as characterized by many works in literature, paintings, music, architectural criticism, and historiography in Western civilization over a period from the 18th to mid 19th century. Excuse me. I apologize. That was rude. But romanticism can be seen over a period of time, can be seen as a rejection of the precepts of order, calm, harmony, balance, idealization, rationality that can be typified. Classicism in general in the late 18th century, neoclassicism in particular, and it was also in some extent a reaction against the Enlightenment, against people in the 18th century rationalizers. And Romanticism emphasizes the individual, the subjective, and the irrational and the imaginative, of the personal and the spontaneous and emotional, of the visionary, of the transcendental. Um, and among these characteristic attitudes, Romanticism, where the following um, were a deepened appreciation for the beauties of nature, kind of a contrast to Goblin Core, actually, if you stop and think about it. Which you can go back and watch that episode because that was a really fun topic to talk about. A general exaltation of emotion over reason and the senses of intellect, a turning upon nature in itself, an examination of the human personality and its moods and mental potentialities, a preoccupation with the genius, the hero, the exceptional figure in general, and the focus on his family, on his or her passions and the inner struggles, um, and a new view of new artists, and as a supremacy individual creator whose creative spirit is more important than in strict adherence and a formal rules of traditional procedures, and emphasis upon imagination as a gateway to the transcendent experience and spiritual truth. It's also obsessive interest in folk culture, national and ethnic cultural origins, and medieval era. The prediction for the exotic, the remote, and the mysterious, as well as the occult and disease, even the satanic. So how's this seen in literature? Well, um, we had to start with Sir Walter Scott. He is often considered to be the inventor and great practitioner of the system of Romanticism as well. Now, Romanticism proper was preceded by several related developments from the mid 18th century that can be termed as pre-Romanticism. Often among these new trends were appreciation of the medieval romances, from which the Romantic movement derives from the names, but the romance also was a tale of a ballad and chivalric adventures with emphasis on many individual heroism and the exotic and mysterious, were it was clear contrast to elegant formality artificially prevailing the classical forms of literature, such as the French neoclassicism tragedy and the English heroic couplet and the poetry. Now, the new interest is relatively unsophisticated, but overly emotional literary expressions of the past to the dominant role in romantic literature. In Romanticism in English literature, Never let that one crazy for a second. But yeah, it began in the mid 1790s in the publication of the lyrical ballads of William Wordsworth, which I will get to him eventually. Um, Maybe not this episode, but I do have an episode planned for him later on. And Samuel Taylor Coleridge and Wordsworth preface to the second edition are lyrical ballads in which were described poetry as a spontaneous overflow of powerful feelings. Now, William Blake, I also plan on talking about him, was a third principal poet of the movement in the early phases of England and the first phase of the Romantic movement in Germany, where was marked with innovations. Now, a wealth of talents, including Frederick Holderman, the early Johann Wolfgang as well. In revolutionary France, Francois Auguste Rene was the Victime de Chateaubriand and Madame de Stael. I apologize if my French is terrible. I took it in high school, but that's been 10 years, and if you don't use it, it's one of those things that just kind of, yeah. But the second phase would consist of the period from 1805 to the 1830s, which was marked by quickening in cultural nationalism and a new attention to the national origins, indeed attested by the collection and imitation of native folklore, folk ballads and poetry, folk dance and music, and even the previously ignored medieval and Renaissance work. Um, Great example of this with some great art poets, some great authors would be Mary Wallenstuff Shelley, Charlotte Bronte. I love Charlotte Bronte. Um, but this was a notable byproduct interest in the emotional aware works dealing with the supernatural and everything. Now, by the 1820s, Romanticism had broadened to embrace the literatures of almost all of Europe, and in this later second phase, the movement was less universal approach and concentrated on exploring each nation's historical and cultural inheritance as well. Now, in the 1760s to 70s, a number of British artists of the home and Rome, including James Barrie, Henry Fussell, James Hamilton, Mortimer, and John Flaxman, began to paint subjects that were at odds with strict decorum. Now, in the next generation of the great genre of the English Romantic landscape, engaged in the works by JMW as well. Now, the question we want to know is why did critics hate this? Well, they hated the death of the sort. Yeah, ignore that. Now, in France, the early chief romantic painters, who or Antoine Jean Quoth, who would paint tableau and contemporary incidents of the Napoleonic War, and Theodore. I'm not even gonna attempt to pronounce that. I'll be honest with y'all. I practice these names, and guess what? I suck at names, so we're just gonna accept that fact. But yeah, because who hates? But that's but romanticism is seen all over Europe, and I think it's very interesting to talk about, and we need to learn about it. But yeah, thank y'all for joining. I know this was probably a bit boring for y'all, but that's okay. I will see y'all next time. Happy Sunday, happy Thanksgiving, or Eagle because Alabama lost to Oklahoma. I get to be more excited.